These don't work long distance. I can't tell where anybody is. Welcome, Belvedere First, B1. Woo! I know half y'all are off playing pickleball or whatever it is you're doing on a Wednesday night because you're not here. Boo, boo.
Pickleball without you.
People working. I know. All kinds of crazy stuff happening tonight. Tonight we are on our spiritual gifts inventory still. Curtis is our next speaker. First of all, let me ask you this. How you guys think Josh did last week? See? And what we're doing is we're offering encouragement to him for doing so well last week, right?
I say have him do it again this week.
You know, okay, do it again this week. All right, go. Well, actually, this week is one that Josh could do. It is on both leadership and administration. So, before we get started, Kristen Smith, would you open us up in prayer?
Sure. Father, I thank you for this night in our church that we get together. And Lord, Father, I thank you for every person who's here. Lord, be with those who aren't here. Just teach us tonight, Lord, Father, and that you just give him your word and that you just would anoint him and help us to receive what you have to give us this evening. And we just praise you and thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Awesome. So tonight is weird. So like when I preach on a Sunday morning, the camera is not in my face. It's way back there.
Right.
And so now I have the camera like in my face. So, hey. Anyways. Hey everybody online. So anyways, today I get to talk about administration and I get to talk about leadership. Administration is, I feel that's more on like my wife's path, and leadership is more down my wife's path and my path. My wife, I'm always, she's my wife, so I might be biased by bragging about her a lot. But I'm going to start out by talking about administration. But my first question I want to ask is, what do you think the difference is between administration and leadership?
Administration is paperwork.
Pay?
No, it's not just
Administration's paperwork. Organizing.
And then the leadership is showing, teaching.
Taking that organization and employing it
and growing.
and growing. Right. So I say my wife is really good at the administration. I always tell people, like, what you see me up front, my wife has made great in the background. So without my wife, you would not see this product. I always tell her she can't go nowhere. If she does, I'm in trouble. And so we're going to start out with 1 Corinthians 12:28. And I'm going to read in our little booklet that hopefully everybody in here has got, that you could take your spiritual test in. Administration, the meaning for that in the back of that is, the gift of administration is the special ability that God gives to certain members of the body of Christ to understand clearly the immediate and long-range goals of a particular unit of body of Christ and to devise and execute effective plans for the accomplishment of those goals. So yeah, it's organizing and figuring out what the main goal is and figuring out how to get to that goal. I have been watching, of course, the people that are close to me and that I've hung out with all day today know that I've been watching this series on the History Channel, the foods that built America. And I had to implement that into tonight's lesson. But one thing I have noticed with how Hershey's got started and Nathan's Hot Dogs got started, when all of these companies got started, it wasn't an easy road for them. It was the early 1900s, sometimes the late 1800s. And when they started this, they did not expect, Hershey's did not expect it to become as big as Hershey's is today. And almost everybody in the world has heard about Hershey's. But they had a lot of challenges along the way, and what they were good at was these leaders were good at figuring out the obstacles they were faced, and they could figure out how to change the direction to make it the way it is today. But in 1 Corinthians 12:28, it says this: here are some of the parts God has appointed for the church. First are apostles, second are prophets, third are teachers, and then those who do miracles, those who have the gift of healing, those who can help others, those who have the gift of leadership, and those who speak in unknown languages. God gives each and every one of us different gifts. And we have to figure out how to use those gifts the way God intends for us to use them. The point of administration is we help people and we help the body to get where they are going, right? We know, like, the vision of, like, pastor, for instance, he knows the vision of our church, and he gets to see each and every one of our gifts, and God reveals to him a lot of times what our gifts are by him, like, watching us. And through that, then he starts to help us grow in our gifts, which then helps build the vision that God has put in his heart for the church. Does that make sense? Did I say that right? In Titus 1:5, I should have marked these in my Bible because I can find them a lot faster when I'm not.
They make Bibles with little tabs.
Yeah. So Paul was with Titus, and he says in verse 5 of chapter 1, he says, I left you on the island of Crete so that you could complete our work there and appoint elders in each town as I instructed you. So he planted a church here, and then he left Titus there to continue to construct it and to complete the work that he started. A little thing about Crete I have in my study Bible. Tradition says that after Paul was released from his first imprisonment in Rome, he and Titus traveled together for a while. They stopped in Crete, and Paul left Titus there to help the churches on the island. Crete had several good harbors, and ships brought people and goods from all parts of the known world. The churches there were probably founded by Cretan Jews who had been in Jerusalem at Pentecost more than 30 years before Paul, who wrote this letter. Kind of a good place to plant a church, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of ports and a whole bunch of, like, and so he left Titus there to continue to work and to continue to help and train these ministries there. And then in administration also, Acts chapter 6. One thing, if you're a newer leader and you don't speak very often, you get to speak, one thing you're always worried about is that you don't have enough material. I always worry about that, because especially when you get nervous, you go through it like extremely fast. So I'm looking over at the clock and I'm like, phew, I'm not even through administration yet. We're good. It's been 10 minutes. All right.
And you're talking slow and complete and enunciating well.
Well, good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You were here for encouragement last week, right?
No, I was watching.
I'm going to read Acts chapter 6, 1 through 7. Does somebody else want to read that?
6 what?
1 through 7.
In those days, as the number of disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint by the Hellenistic Jews against the Hebraic Jews that their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution. Then the 12 summoned the whole company of his disciples and said, it would not be right for us to give up preaching about God to handle financial matters. Therefore, brothers, select among you 7 men of good reputation, full of spirit and wisdom, who we can appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to preaching the ministry. The proposal pleased the whole company, so they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and Holy Spirit, and Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenius, and Nicholas, a proselyte from Antioch. They had them stand before the apostles, who prayed and laid hands on them.
7.
So the preaching about God flourished. The number of disciples in Jerusalem multiplied greatly, and a large group of priests became obedient in faith.
So they had a food pantry, and they were distributing food. People were complaining that
Even then.
I know, right? That this person got food and they didn't get food because they're not one of us or they're not like us, and
So it's
and
nothing new under
and
the
the,
sun.
and the apostles were like, whoa, we don't have time to deal with all of this, right? Like, that's like everybody, all 300 families come and complain to pastor, which they might do, I don't know, but all the 300 families that we serve, or 500 families, come and complain to pastor, and he's like, whoa, this is taking up my whole entire week. I got a church to run, right? Like, so I'm going to appoint some people to deal with this. So, and he appoints Kristen to deal with them, and she messages them back, hey, we do the best we can. And then we got, and
We also
then
have Debbie on phones.
and then puts Debbie on phones, you know.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, come back next week. Hopefully we'll have it then. Like, but anyways, they realized that they couldn't do it all. And here's the thing, as administration, we realize in the church that you can't do everything, right? And so that's what the importance of everybody working together, and the administrator figures out these people and can put them in the right places and do the right things. And I'm so thankful that that we have a church that pastor likes to throw all of us in our uncomfort zones and show us that we can do it, right?
Yeah, it's great.
Through Jesus. And a lot of times he's like, you're right, you can't do it, but through Jesus you can, right? And so, administration. Now we're going to talk about leadership a little bit. I probably got a little bit more in this because I feel like I do a little bit better at leadership than I do administration. Like I said, my wife's the organizer, and I'm good at implementing it sometimes. What makes a good leader?
Being able to influence.
Good leader, I think, is somebody that leads by example.
Leads by example?
Somebody who listens.
Listens?
Character.
What's the opposite of a good leader?
Bad.
Somebody that's just relying on a position or a title instead of building relationships with people and like actually showing them like the way that you should be, the way that you should act. Just somebody saying, I'm in charge and this is what we're gonna do.
Right.
That's the opposite.
Leadership is it's kind of it comes naturally to some people, and some people it doesn't. Some people are really good at getting people on board and going, but there's always room to grow in leadership just because it comes naturally. You know, when I first came here, I had the natural leadership ability, but I had no idea how to use it, right? And through the 4 years here, and through training and through Pastor being really patient with me, I have learned to become better. And there's still a lot more things I need to learn and that I'm learning from. Did you want something to say, Marlene?
I think a poor leader is micromanaged, drives me crazy. You give somebody the responsibility, but you're constantly taking it away from them.
Right,
A good leader doesn't do that.
right. A good leader kind of trains and trusts, right?
Yeah, at their own pace sometimes.
So, spiritually, somebody like, how do I say it? So, how does, what are some things that you would think would be in a spiritual leadership? Like, what makes a good spiritual leader? We talk kind of like what makes a good leader. What makes a good spiritual leader? I mean, you can use some of those same things, but what would be set apart? Like, what would be different?
Lead by example, having to walk side by side and see how you do things.
Right?
Humility.
Humility,
Grace and patience.
grace,
Listen,
listen.
You can always tell when people are pouring themselves out with their heart.
Mm-hmm.
Kindness and like love the person
Compassion.
and like teach them without getting mad at them.
Right. Right. Leadership is I have worked for two different kinds of places. I have worked for places where they lead out of you're going to do this because I pay you, and I have worked for places that are like, hey, they lead by example, and they like say, they bring you on, they have the idea, they train you, and they bring you on to their ideas, and that's something, usually there's less of a turnaround in the companies that actually bring you alongside and show you their vision and bring you along with their vision, right? Instead of just saying, this is how I want it done and I pay you, so you're going to do it. There's 5 C's of leadership. I looked them up yesterday. One of them is character. Second one is commitment. 3 is courage. 4 is confidence. And 5 is communication.
Say them again.
I got character, commitment, courage, confidence, and communication. And I think, like, spiritually, like, I always like to change 4 out for Godfidence. Because sometimes you don't have confidence in yourself, but we can always have confidence in the one that's calling us. And so we call that Godfidence. I stole that from somebody else. I didn't come up with that on my own. It was cool, though. So, and communication. In Acts 7:10, it talks a little bit, like, right over a little bit. I'm going to start in verse 9, actually. It says, these patriarchs were jealous of their brother Joseph, and they sold him to be a slave in Egypt, but God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. God gave him favor before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and God also gave Joseph unusual wisdom, so that Pharaoh appointed him governor over all of Egypt and put him in charge of the palace. Here's the thing about Joseph's life. If you know anything about Joseph's life, so I'm pretty sure everybody in here is familiar with Joseph. But if you're not, so Joseph had a really rough life, right? But first he was kind of confident, right? Like he got those dreams and he was like, these are my dreams. I'm going to be over you, right? And if you know anybody about, if Lucas were to come up to Bridget and say, hey, I had a dream and someday I'm going to be over you, that doesn't go very well in the Kettner household. I have to deal then with an argument in the background. And then there's pulling hair and it just gets nasty. But but anyways, so they didn't like that too well. And then not on top of that, he was kind of the youngest, and he was at the time, and he was his, his dad's favorite. And so then he got the coat of many colors, and he's like, hey, look at my coat, right? Like, you didn't get a coat, right? I'm sure it didn't happen like that, but that's kind of how I picture it, right? Like he's bragging to them. So they end up throwing him in a pit, and they were going to kill him, and they ended up not killing him, and they sold him into slavery. And God, sometimes in leadership, God allows us sometimes to go through these certain things. And I don't think God's ever shocked in how we handle it. I think God's showing us how we handled it, right? And God is teaching us through it. But Joseph really did handle all that stuff pretty well. And then because of that, God used him. He handled that well. And a lot of times if God gives us things and then when we prove ourselves in those, you get more stuff, right? And so then he ended up, and then in Potiphar's, household, she accused him of raping her, and he fled from her, and then he ended up getting thrown in jail. But then he listened, right? He kept that communication with God, and he listened to God. And so he had good character, because even behind closed doors when no one else was looking, he fled from the wrong, right? Even when he got accused of doing the wrong thing, he still did the right thing. So he had good character. Commitment. He was committed. He knew the dreams he had, and he knew God had a plan for him. And he didn't always know exactly probably where that was going to lead and what that plan was, but he was committed to do whatever God wanted him to do and to be surrendered to God. He had courage, right? Can you imagine being thrown in jail and all this stuff? And he was in jail for a very long time. And then he interpreted some dreams in jail. And he got those dreams right, and they said, we won't forget about you. And guess what? They forgot about him, and he still just hung out and did what he was supposed to do. He had courage, confidence. Like I said, he had confidence that he knew that he had a calling of God on his life. And then communication, he continued to communicate. And when people came to him as his dreams, he would talk to God and he would communicate that dream to them. So he had communication. In Luke 9:51 through 55. So I don't know if this is my favorite, but this is one of my favorite passages in the Bible, because I just like it, and I'll explain why. At the time drew near for him to ascend to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out to Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead to Samaritan villages to prepare for his arrival. But the people of the villages did not welcome Jesus because he was on his way to Jerusalem. Samaria and Jerusalem, they weren't getting along. When James and John saw this, they said to Jesus, Lord, Should we call down fire from heaven to burn them up? But Jesus turned and rebuked them. So they went to another village. As a leader, sometimes you're going to be rejected, right? Like sometimes people are not always going to like the way that you lead, and they're going to reject you. And sometimes there are going to be people in our life that we want to call down fire on, right? And what I love about this passage is they're like, God, you want us to call down fire on? They're like messing with Jesus, right? And I love that. It's like when somebody goes after our pastor, we're like, you know, you want us to call down fire on him? We're going to treat him like junk too, right? Like, and pastor's like, no, calm down, we love, we accept, you know, like, but I'm not saying I've ever been in his office like that, okay? But anyways, what amazes me about that is the fact that they were with Jesus for so long and God's done so many things to the disciples that they actually thought they could call down fire on people. And right? And Jesus is like, hey, chill. You know, like this is not how we do things. And God just moves on. You know, he's like, you know, if they don't want it, move on. And there are going to be people in our life sometimes that reject us. And when they reject us, you know, we have, you know, in ministry, you learn how to deal with rejection. How are some healthy ways to deal with rejection?
Not calling down fire.
Not calling down fire.
Party Cooper.
Party Cooper.
No throw punches.
No throw punching. What? None of us like rejection, right? Like if we were all honest, none of us want to be rejected. I don't like to be rejected. I have rejection triggers, and sometimes my rejection triggers, I'm going to reject you before you reject me, right? Sometimes I'm talking to my wife and I'll feel rejected by something and I will tell my wife, I'll be like, you know what? And I'll just start like going in. She goes, no. She goes, stop it. She goes, we're not going to be that way. You know, sometimes I try to attack other people before they attack me, right? Like that's just human nature sometimes, and it's stuff we have to work through and overcome and get over.
I've struggled here off and on lately the last few years with rejection, trying to sell jobs.
Right?
You know, and how much do I want to come down and get this job? You know?
Right.
It really hurts. I went on, I got a call from this sweet lady out at Shattuck Road. She's pushing 90. She's all by herself out there. And I come way down for her. I gave her a good deal. She, thank you, please do this for me. But I could not, no way, feel comfortable giving her my average price, you know. I would not want to be rejected for that.
Right.
That's character.
I think the hardest part of rejection for me is when you're pouring your heart out to somebody, giving them the gospel and all that stuff, and they act like they're in another world and they're not paying a little bit of attention to you. What am I not saying right? What am I not doing right? And in reality, they're not rejecting me; they're rejecting God.
Right.
Amen.
Right.
It's the hard one for me to
Right.
I know, right?
Right. For sure.
You know, when I think about rejection, what I've learned just being in leadership and working with more junior leaders. I mean, when you're a leader, you're always a junior leader before you grow into a leader. If your leadership grows, but I've found so many times inside of some of the junior leaders and myself that rejection is also an indication of not something that they did, but maybe something you've done, or you've created, where you have maybe unintentionally have miscommunicated or made decisions that brought that rejection, where you want a certain result, but maybe how you did it to get that result wasn't favorable. But sometimes, you know, some of the rejection that happens in our life is a direct result of the little holes that we kind of put in our own lap, that we can insincerely have the right heart, the right intentions. And it reminds me of like when Pastor says how sometimes we bring like a mud pie door to our parents, or you know, our intentions are so good, but sometimes it's like, man, I totally got rejected. Like I cannot believe I felt that sting, even though my heart was in the right place. But I knew that there was still something inside of my leadership that needed to grow and change, that I needed to see that rejection is actually going to help me, right, see, so I could begin to grow in that area where I was rejected, so I could, you know, work through that.
Right. Right. And then to close, Romans 12:8. shouldn't say to close, to turn it over to Pastor. We're not closed. I don't want to get you guys' hopes up. We're not closing yet. So Romans 12:8, it says, if your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. What I want to end my part with tonight is be the you that God created you to be, and always be moldable to continuously become the person God created you to be. And then because when we are moldable and we allow God to continue to create us into the us that he wants us to be, then God can start using us in all these different ways, shapes, and forms.
Amen. So a couple things. One, hi to Linda, June, and Wayne, Dola, Jim, Sammy, who's actually over there, but also helps me by responding to people online, because when you give us conversation online, it drives up our visibility, which is a good thing. Who in our church, and keep me out of this, right? Name other people in our church who have a gift of administration. Debbie, yeah, that'd be good, right? Her job kind of requires it.
Over there.
Who? Ashley Villarreal, yeah, absolutely, right? Got a administrative gift, right? Teresa, oh my gosh, Teresa, yeah. Teresa's gonna file. I'm gonna wake up in a filing cabinet in a folder one day. Teresa's just gonna, she's like, "This is where I keep you, Pastor." I'm like, okay, right? Who are some leaders in our church? Val and Andy are leaders in our church. Who are leaders in or outside our church, right? Who have a gift of leadership. And I'm saying this so we can actually encourage each other, right? Because one of the things we talked about last week about encouragement, when you acknowledge someone else's spiritual gifts, they feel like they have, you know what I'm saying? Like if you have a spiritual gift and nobody ever tells you any good thing about it, you think you're a little crazy, and maybe I don't have that. And one of the reasons why we call out when we're like, hey, now how many of you, did any of you score high in leadership or administration on your thing? Right? Yeah, and I know you do. Administration or leadership? Both, right? Awesome. What'd you score in? Both? Did you take it, Bridget?
No.
Oh, okay. You should totally take it.
Right?
So let me ask. Okay. So first, let's name some administrators in the Bible. Can anybody think of administrators in the Bible? Paul, I'm going to say, is a leader, not an administrator. But he had both. Paul actually had both, and we're going to come back to Paul. So we're going to circle that wagon back to Paul here in a second. King David, I would actually put as a leader, not as administrator. You know why? Because he would always do things and let everybody else clean up behind him, right?
Titus, because he left Titus in.
Right.
Well, yeah, right? So here's the main one. And by the way, Josh, Curtis, Ashley, any of you guys going into ministry, any of you guys are ever going to preach, the first sermon you preach, whenever you go into a rebuild situation, when you're going into a messy place and you got to rebuild it, do you know what the first book you preach on is? Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah comes back to Jerusalem when the walls have been torn down, when the city is left in ruins, when everything is broken, and Nehemiah comes in, and he's not a great leader. But he knows how to get stuff done. He has served as the cupbearer to the king. He knows how palaces run. He knows how things administrate. And so Nehemiah comes in, and he's not a great motivator. You know how he's not a great motivator? Because people aren't doing what he says over and over again. Whenever he's opposed, he kind of falls back. And the Lord takes care of him the whole way, because you find that the Lord tends to take care of you when you don't have those things. But my favorite is when Nehemiah got to the point where he said, okay, you know what? You're building your walls in the house. You're building your houses in the walls first. So since we're not getting the walls built, everybody's going to build your house as part of the wall. So when your house is built, the wall is built. That way we can keep the enemies out of town. And then he told the people, you've got to have a shovel in one hand and a sword in the other, right? You got to work with your shovel here, but you keep your sword in, because if the enemies start coming in while you're working, you got to be able to turn and fight. But he's the one that says you need to have all of these tools available, right? By the way, I think my wife is also an administrator. Yeah, and here's the thing too. Administrators and leaders share some characteristics, right? So can you name some things that both an administrator and a leader would both have to have? And you guys mentioned some of them earlier.
Multitasking ability.
The ability to switch tasks, I would say. They gotta be agile, right? But let's talk character. What kind of things should both leaders or administrators be able to do?
The
So the right thing requires discernment, right? It requires a moral compass, right? So both of them have to have a strong sense of a moral compass, of right and wrong, and the courage to do the right thing, right? When an administrator wants to do the right thing, I think it's harder because sometimes. Now here's one thing they share in common. I'll just give you this one. They both share authority. You can't be an administrator without the authority to complete the job. If you've ever been made administrator of a job and not given the authority to complete it, it gets really frustrating, right? And here's the thing about being a leader. Do you know what the key difference between a leader and an administrator is? Followers. Administrators don't need you to follow them. They need you to do your job, right? A leader is about getting you to follow him. Hey, I'm going this way. Let's go, guys. Let's do it. But both of them require a level of authority. I always joke that when I go out and direct traffic, everybody listens to me for no reason, right? Like even when the parents were out there being snotty and stuff like that, I just had this way of, hey, guys, you got to go this way. I keep smiling at you, you jerk. I would think that in my head. I wouldn't say it out loud. But, because people get really testy with you. You're just out there like, I literally looked at a guy once. I'm like, we're just trying to feed hungry people, right? That's all we're trying to do here because people get that way. I had no real authority from the state. I had no badge. I couldn't actually tell people, but there was a way you can talk to them that'll get them to go along with you. Even people who didn't want to go along with you would do it if you just said it the right way. I like what Roosevelt always said about diplomacy. Diplomacy is the art of saying good doggy while picking up a stick, right? Good dog, whack. So biblical examples of, I have Joseph as an administrator, not a leader. Do you know why? Because if you follow Joseph's life, he never wanted to be the main guy. When he's in prison, he's not the prison leader, but he is the guy who makes the prison run well. And the leader's like, oh my gosh, when I've got you here, Joseph, everything runs right? When he's in Potiphar's house, he doesn't want to be Potiphar, but when he's in Potiphar's house, everything runs right. When the Pharaoh needs a guy, right? Joseph's like, I don't need to be the Pharaoh, but let me tell you something. If you put me in charge, you're going to feed everybody for a long, long time. I can tell you that without first Colleen Leach and then Kristen, we wouldn't have a food pantry. I would have every desire in my heart to feed hungry people. And they would get here and I would be giving them like Kool-Aid packets and candy bars. I'd be like, I ran to the 7-Eleven before y'all got here and this is what everybody gets today, right? Because I don't have that sort of administrative make everything work sort of gift. By the way, Pat has an administrative gift too. But here's the thing about administrators. They're usually not noisy like leaders are, right? Like leaders are like, I'm a leader. And administrators are like, do your job, right? So it's like, they don't have to go out there and broadcast it and say things like that. And what's great too, I'm going to pick on Paul and Pat a little bit because they kind of have the same dynamic where Paul has more of a leadership gift and Pat has more of an administrative gift. Paul's more like, hey guys, let's go get this job done kind of thing. And Pat's more like, hey, you need to get these ducks in a row, right? And I know Paul even has another administrator in his business, but when you had the accountant behind the scenes too, that because of our personality, we tend to have those structured people behind us that make everything work because leaders have vision, right? They have plans, they have dreams, they got ideas, right? Go ahead, Marlene.
A good leader knows when to delegate too.
A good leader knows when to delegate. And somebody said, I think it was you actually said too, that a leader has to know how to listen. An administrator has to know how to listen. And you know what is required so that people know how to listen? Do you know what biblical fruit is required that gives people the ability to listen? No, but I like it. Huh?
Patience?
Not the one I'm looking for, but sure.
Humility?
Humility. Right. There has to be some part of you as a leader or as an administrator that says, I don't know everything. Even if I'm a good leader, I'm not the greatest leader. Even if I'm the greatest leader, I'm not a perfect leader. Right? Even if I'm a great administrator, I'm not the greatest administrator. Even if I'm the greatest administrator, I'm not a perfect administrator. And there are going to be holes because I don't have all knowledge. I can't see everything. Right. So we have to have the humility to say other people have input into this. Right? I feel like you guys got questions and comments. I'm pausing for effect.
I know, pantry, that reminds me of pantry. Like often, like somebody will say, why did you let somebody like try something a certain way? Because inevitably when you have a new volunteer at the pantry, they're like, we should try it this way. And like they don't always want to hear what I have to say. Like they're gonna try something the new way. And I have learned you let them try it that way because they'll buy into your vision once they try if yours is the better way, which I do the things that I do.
And Kristen's like, obviously my way is the better way.
I think it's better, I wouldn't be doing it that way.
Yeah.
But if you let somebody try their way, then they're more likely to plug into your vision respected that you let them try, then they're more likely to work for you long-term because you respected them enough to let them try. You heard them and maybe like you took a piece of their idea and then went back and like plugged it into yours, but you had the like respect for them to let them kind of
Absolutely.
put it into the business.
Absolutely.
Wait a minute, you've done that to me.
Wait a second. Well, and again, go ahead, Marlene. What are you going to say?
What you said was when she was talking about incorporating whatever they said into what she was doing, I think that's a key, is, you know what, that's not a bad idea, why don't we work on this here?
Yeah.
In the meantime, do what I'm just, in the meantime, do what I tell you.
And the opposite of humility, yeah. The opposite of humility is what?
Arrogance.
Arrogance, pride, right? That's why we don't celebrate Pride Month. It's horrible. Pride blocks out your ability to hear from others. Pride says, my way is better. Pride takes offense and says, how dare you tell me how to do my job? Versus humility, which says, you know what? We're going to try your way, even if I don't, even if I'm not, listen, I've tried this before, right? And this doesn't work, but you know what? We're going to let you do it because I want you to see how the system works. Because then again, too, they are more willing to help when you give people room to express their ideas. If you have to be the loudest person and everybody has to follow what you say and you rule with an iron fist, right? Because a leader without a vision, a leader without humility is just a boss. Right? That's why I hate the term boss when they say boss girl, boss guy, those kind of things, right? Because anybody can be a boss. All you need to be a boss is for someone to put you in a position of authority, and then you can just use that authority to beat the snot out of people, and you have to do what I do. I served in the military, and I served for some amazing commanders, and I served some amazing wingnuts, right? Like just people who you were just looking at them. My favorite example of the what was that? Oh, there was a warrant officer. Dude was just amazing because he could talk to the captain of the ship. He could talk to the lowest. We'd call each other knuckle draggers or he had all kinds of crazy names. I forget. You can't say all these things outside of the military. We had all kinds of names but he could talk to the lowest guy, the deck plate. He could talk to the captain, and he could get his point across, and he could get him to see his vision. I had one officer though, and I always tell this story because a ship is made out of steel. And we were in overhaul, so we were taking the flooring out of a space. It was tile flooring. Once you take the tile flooring out, you had to ground off the adhesive, so you got to the bare metal. And some officer on the night shift came by and told the on-duty petty officer, why is this bare metal all dusty? You need to mop this. And he's like, sir, we shouldn't mop this bare metal. He's like, you need to mop this bare metal. I don't want this dirt all over this bare metal. So they mopped it, and what does it look like in the morning? Rust. Right. But the guy had authority. He had the ability to boss people and to tell them what to do. And in the military, there's a point in which you say, yes, sir. As a big Tennyson fan, my favorite poem, right? Charge of the Light Brigade. There's not to make reply. There's not to question why. There's but to do and die. Into the valley of death. Rode the 600. Right? There was a heroic charge made, but the charge wouldn't have to be heroic if somebody in the beginning had the right intelligence. Right? And so a bad leader will send other people to die in their place. A good leader will specifics of your job. Absolutely. Why, Ashley?
Because it's your job to do that. They have to make sure that you have what you need in order to do that job, not do that specific job.
Right. Because and gosh, this is one of the things too people learn in business, that if you're irreplaceable, you're unpromotable. Right? Like if nobody can do what you can do, then they will never let you out of that job. Right? If you're the only one that can do it and you're the only one that can do it well, they will stick you in that hole forever because they need that done. Here you go, bye. Right? But a good leader will facilitate you in getting that job done, remove obstacles in the way of you getting your job done, even if those obstacles are other leaders, right? I think sometimes when you get too many managers in a company, you get guys that just like, I need something to do. I think our current political situation could be described as we have a whole bunch of people in Congress that don't have anything else to do, so they pass weird laws. Like when Congress got involved in baseball, they're like, you know what, we need to tackle baseball steroids. I'm like, really, Congress? Is that really? I mean, listen, I don't like steroids in baseball. I think that's a thing that should be addressed, but probably not by the nation's highest governing body. I think you guys could have other things on your plate. Right. But sometimes it does feel like that, right? Like if somebody is in a leadership role and doesn't have enough to do, instead of being a good leader, they just get busy work. And I think sometimes our Congress needs some busy work. Listen, we don't need you all to do anything right now, so just anyway, stop it. All right, so biblical examples, by the way, I had Joseph, I had Nehemiah, and you also picked the other one I had, Acts chapter 6. Because Acts chapter 6, when they're talking about people who have administrative gifts, what is the title they give those people, Curtis?
Say that again.
In Acts chapter 6, they were looking for people with administrative gifts. Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. You already had somebody read it. What was the title they give those people that have administrative gifts? Deacons. This is where they pick out the first deacons. They're looking for people who are good administrators, right? The apostles were in positions of leadership, but they need people who would, manage the finances of the church, make sure the properties of the church taken care of, make sure the business of the church is being transacted in a ethical manner, those sorts of things. Those are what deacons look after. That's why a lot of times when I'm looking for deacons, I end up getting quiet guys, because you get your Chris Kabatskis and your Alex Villareals and your Mark DeLauders. Paul's my only other real extrovert on the board, I think, right? And who's my other deacon that I'm missing there? Chris, Mark, Paul, Alex. No, those four, right? Three of those are introverts. Only two of us are extroverts, right? And the reason Paul's on there is because Paul knows how to do stuff. Do you know why? I wanted Paul as a deacon, because Paul's a guy that knows how to do stuff. And I'm like, Paul, there's this weird thing going on with the stairs. Paul's like texting me pictures. These are things we could do with that, right? He knows how to do things. He knows how to administer, right? So you do have that administrative part of it, and that's what makes a good deacon in a church, someone who knows how to administer. Now, what are some leaders in the Bible? And you guys mentioned some leaders. So who are some leaders in the Bible? David was absolutely a leader, because David always had people, right? David doesn't do anything alone, even Bathsheba. He doesn't even commit adultery by himself, because he has to get Joab to go kill her husband, right? He's like, listen, got this affair going on. Let's go get some people to kill the husband. I mean, we're saying that in joking. Go ahead. Moses is the most reluctant leader in the whole Bible. God's like, Moses, lead my people. Moses like, what about my brother? God said, Moses, lead my people. Can't speak, Lord. Totally. I would love to lead your people. Really love you, Lord. Can't talk. You're going to have to find someone else, right? And then even I like that even Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, has to come up and be like, Moses, you're pretty terrible at a lot of this. Why don't you delegate some of this stuff to people who...
He even kills the guy.
Moses' leadership skill is, stop it, I will stab you with a sword. I have served under that person. Right. Okay, so...
And Paul. Can't forget Paul.
Right. So, by the way, characteristics leaders and administrators both have to share. They have to have authority. They have to have the ability to do their job, right? A leader's authority comes from his ability to influence, right? A leader has to be able to say, hey, let's go do this, guys, and bring people on board. One of my frustrations in ministry is sometimes you get people who are called to ministry, and they feel like in pastoral roles and leadership roles, and they don't deal with people well. And I'm just going to tell you something. If you want to be in ministry, you have to learn to deal with people well. It doesn't work if you don't learn to deal with people well. If you take offense at every criticism leveled at you, tell them, Curtis, it's going to hurt. And it's going to hurt a lot, right? I have people, I remember... Kristen and I, we used to joke. We used to do this thing out at Sheffield, and we'd go out there and we'd like play some country gospel songs, and we'd do this. And there was one lady every Sunday night we would preach out there. She would come up to me afterwards. She goes, "You did so good, but you should hear my pastor preach." every week. And then she would tell Kristen, "You're so pretty, but my pastor's wife is beautiful." And there was no part of me that was like, you don't get mad about it, because that is just where they're at. You just kind of smile and you just laugh. People have, you have to learn.
I said that all the time too.
Yeah. The key thing about leadership is doing what they call chewing the meat and spitting out the bone, right?
Yeah.
When people complain to you, there's usually validity into it, right? If somebody tells me the music is too loud in worship, whether or not I think it's too loud, I have to understand that they just had the experience where something was going wrong in there, and they're letting me know that, and I have to address it in some way, even if I don't agree with the whole thing, right? There are times where people will say, well, I don't like it when we do this, or I don't like it when we do that. Now, if it's a strong thing and I'm like, you know what, I have to stand on this one, I have to fight for this one, and times I will. Most of the time, though, I'm going to listen to that, and I'm going to modify where I'm at, right? You can't be a leader and just run over people all the time. I remember Jake, when he was the first week of being a youth pastor, painted the entire downstairs and painted the youth room. And I'm like, you were going to get fired at your first church as a pastor, because you come in there. Listen, the only decoration I changed for the entire first year I was here, I promise you, Pat, I only actually changed one decoration the entire year I was here, was I took out the pulpit. because the pulpit we had was about yay wide. I knew there was too much room in that pulpit when I saw the fire extinguisher there and like a box of tissues and a thing of hymnals. And I'm like, this is like a survivalist. Like, I don't know what he expects. But to me, that was the one kind of symbol of the office, right? Like as a pastor. And so I did one of these. And then actually Pat and June got me a plexiglass pulpit that we used for a little bit. And then we kind of moved to the one we have now. But it's sort of a symbol of what I do as my office. But that was the only decoration I changed, because I know that you don't come into someone else's church, right? Because the pastor had been here before me. He'd been here 24 years. People loved him. He'd done a lot of things here. He was in a lot of people's hearts. You don't come in and just start tearing the place apart, right? So being a good leader in that was to, one, learn my people, right? Before the church could grow, I had to learn the people I had. I had to build relationship with the people I had, because I didn't know y'all, and y'all seemed crazy, right? Just you guys were here when I got here. Yeah, so in this room, you three were here. Yeah, I know, right? But you know, for the first year, I lost one family, and that was Mike and Robin, right? Because he was related to the other pastor, and I kind of knew that was going to, right? Lost one deacon, right? But that first year, that was for me to know the church, right? And then the second year, we started doing things. Third year, we took out the pews, you know. That was my first real, you know, come on, guys. Yeah. But even then, we didn't run over people. Even then, we tried to bring as many people into the decision, right? Because like Kristen said, as an administrator, if you bring people in on the decision and give them a voice, even if you don't go completely their way, if you give them some of their way, right? Because all of this is going to be a level of compromise. You as a leader have to be willing to compromise. You can't be, you know, my way or the highway. My way or the highway only works with kids under the age of 11, right? Sometimes, right. Sometimes you have a mature 10-year-old and they'll tell you off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody in this room included. How are we on time? We are good. Oh, we're great. All right. So you have so authority, humility, sensitivity is important in a leader and in an administrator, right? Because here's the thing too, I have learned as a pastor, people are horrible at telling you what's really on their heart. Sometimes people come to you and they're mad about something, and what they're mad about isn't what they're mad about, right? Same thing in marriage. Sometimes your spouse comes home and they're grumpy, right? Kristen's like that all the time. I'm like, why are you so grumpy? I'm kidding. It's me. Right. But they come, and they're mad about one thing, but they're telling you another thing, right? And sometimes people are telling me, gosh, it usually happens when someone's mad at somebody else in church. I can tell you this as a pastor. I'm just going to tell you this, right? Tell you, everybody watching online, this. No matter how mad you are at somebody else, I'm never going to pick your side or their side, right? Like, you know, unless I catch them murdering you and they're holding the knife, then I'd be like, wow, that is definitely wrong. You should not be murdering that person. I mean, it's got to be, you know what I'm saying? Because most of the time, both people, I've been in very few confrontations in church where it was just one person trying to really, you know, get the other person. It usually almost always boils down to communication. One of the problems we have in church, one of the just core problems you have in church, Josh, is this, is that 80% of the relationships that people have in this church happen 10 to 15 minutes before and after a service on a Sunday morning, right? How many people we have in here tonight? 20, 30, right? Usually on a Wednesday night, we might get 35, 40 on a Wednesday night. On Sunday, we can have anywhere from, 80 to 150, depending on the day, right? And so obviously not everybody here's on Sunday night, not everybody here's on pantry, they're not always spending time together all week. So we have this whole group of people in our church that their only relationship with other people in this church is 15 minutes before service and 15 minutes after service. What that means is if they say something in that time, they can really hurt someone's feelings, never realize it, and then one person walks away hurt, one person walks away ignorant, and this person ends up leaving the church because they're like, people that aren't friendly, they don't love me, they don't this, they don't that. That's why I always say that with my core group, with my leaders, with my faithful, with the people that are in that group that are always here, right? That we have to be super intentional about reaching about building relationships, about catching people in between that 60-yard dash that they're trying to get to their car after the service. You stand at the door, hey, did you fill out your Connect card? Can I talk to you? Curtis has been doing an amazing job at connecting with people. Now let me ask you guys this. There is one, you guys know about the fivefold ministry? Come on, Josh, tell me about the fivefold ministry. What are the five? and evangelist. Pastor, teacher, prophet, evangelist. Pastor, teacher, prophet, apostle, evangelist, right? Those are kind of the five. They're not just the five, because fivefold gets a little weird. People can get a little weird. You get business cards that say, hey, I'm prophet so-and-so, right? I'm just going to tell you this. Having a prophetic word doesn't make you a prophet. Doesn't mean you should walk in the office of a prophet. Sometimes, right, Saul prophesied, right? And everybody was like, Saul's prophesying? What? Right? And that, which of those 5 offices has to have both of these gifts? Prophet, evangelist, apostle, pastor, teacher. Which one has to have both administration and leadership? Huh? No. Teachers don't have to be leaders because teachers like information better than they like people. No, pastors don't, because I've seen pastors that are great leaders and poor administrators, and pastors are great administrators and poor leaders. Right. Apostle! Whoa, Bridget! Do your dance. The apostolic ministry requires that you be both a leader and an administrator. And the reason we know that is because we have the book of 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. That Paul was not only a leader, somebody who knew how to go out and raise up other people into ministry, but he was an administrator in that he sent them instructions on this is how you run a church and this is what you do. And he was able to replicate himself in other people because he had the administrative gifts, right? That's why I said we're collecting funds for this church here. You know, like we're here and this is a well-to-do church. And so we're taking funds from here to this church where everybody's poor, and we're going to help them out there because they're struggling there. And he had the administration and the leadership abilities. And that is the one gift of the fivefold that requires that you have both of those things. So there you go. How about that, right? If you don't have them, you got to have somebody who has them. So leaders and administrators have strengths and weaknesses. So what are the strengths of administrators? What are their strengths? What are administrators really good at? Organizing, increasing efficiency, right? What sort of things, like you have a good administrator, what do they do? What do they do for you? The QA, right? Your quality of product goes up, right? Right.
Bring awareness to what's going on.
Bring awareness to what's going on so everybody can see kind of the picture. Now here's a question. What are the weaknesses of people who are administrators, especially after the natural? Not spiritual gift of administration, but people that are administrators also have specific blind spots and weaknesses or can develop them. What are some that they could develop?
They know how they want things done.
They can be rigid, right? Like follow the rules, right? You ever had that person, you're like, the rule's not going to work on it. Follow the rules, right? You become a rule robot, right?
Calm down.
See my rule follower.
You make a plan, you follow the plan, okay?
Follow the JIS.
Over analytical.
Yeah.
Very attacked right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plan.
They can overplan and under-execute, right? Because administrators tend to be quieter. They don't always like to step on toes and execute, right? Yeah. And the one I have, of course, is that administrators tend to look at tasks, not people, right? They tend to be about the job, not the people doing the job, right? Okay, so leaders. What are some strengths of leaders? What do leaders bring to the table? Charisma. Hey, hey, smiley leader guy, right? Okay. Motivation. Go team, right? Encouragers are great leaders, right? Because encouragers like, we can do it. Let's go, right? They're out there cheering everybody on, right? They can bring vision, right? They can be like, dude, the Lord is talking to me and this is what I see and I think we can do this thing, right? If everybody's like, I don't know if we can do that. We can totally do that. Let's do this, guys. Let's push in that direction. Now, what are the weaknesses of leaders? Dun, dun, dun. Discouragement is huge, yeah. Yeah, because the problem with leaders is if they don't get that vision, if they don't get results, if they have to get bogged down. See, an administrator can handle with getting bogged down easier because they'll say, okay, I've got a whole lot of tasks. Let's break this into smaller tasks and start completing tasks, right? Leaders get bogged down and they quit, right? People aren't listening to me. Nobody loves me. Church isn't growing. Things aren't going the way they want to. Business isn't going right? People are rejecting me. Every Monday morning, Kristen's like, no, you can go be a pastor again. I'm like, nope, I'm done. It's over. I'm the worst. Right? Leaders can get discouraged. As a pastor, let me ask you this. How many of you have seen conflicts between leaders in a church? Yeah. I know, yeah, right? Why do you think leaders in churches struggle with each other? Well, pride is huge, right?
Sometimes it's different.
Especially if they
Wait.
get on YouTube, then it's very
Yeah,
private.
let me just
They
let me.
each have their own agenda.
Yeah, they have their own agenda. Let me, because here's the thing. I was talking to somebody, just talking about stuff. When someone tells me as a pastor, they come to me as a pastor, and they say, Pastor, I feel like the Lord has said this. I'm going to say 50-50. I have right in the back of my mind, he did not tell you that. like sometimes I'm like, man, that is absolutely from the Lord. But there are a lot of times where I'm like, I really feel like that's just kind of what you want or what you feel like you have to do. I don't feel like that's from, right? And so as a pastor, one of the big things you got to do is to teach people to disseminate between what is from the Lord and what is from my own heart or my own desire, right? My biggest problem as a pastor is always going to be I need to make sure that I am preaching, teaching, doing what's from the Lord and not what I want to preach, teach, and do, right? I mean, that's the thing you got to learn. But what about when two different people think they've heard two different things from the Lord and it affects the same sort of piece of territory, right? Then you're not just rejecting me. You're not telling me I'm wrong. You're telling God he's wrong, and I've heard from God and you haven't, and it becomes a thing, doesn't it? One of the things that pastors struggle with other leaders in church is a thing called rogue tendencies. As a pastor of a church, I'm going to tell you I'm not the greatest pastor. I'm not a perfect pastor. But I am the pastor. But Paul, you've been with me a long time. How many people came into this church thinking they could do it better than me? And half of them were right. Like half of them, they might have been right. But you know what? They weren't called. It wasn't their job. It wasn't their place. Because as a leader, you have to know how to follow, right? One thing Pastor Bashir always taught me, if you want to get where you need to go, get somewhere else where they need to go, and then God will get you where you need to go, right? So the first thing I had to learn as a pastor was to get under other pastors, to serve them, to wash their hands, to do whatever they needed, and learn how to follow so I knew how to do the job, because the best way to learn how to do a job is to watch somebody who knows how to do the job, right? And listen to them when they say things, and you walk through it, right? You have a whole lot of people, never had a single person follow them, never done a single ministry in their life, never run anything successful ever, that just know how you should do your job, right?
As a pastor, if there was like several pastors up in the front, would every one of the pastors all have that same full extent belief in every little subject and category of the Bible?
No,
They
absolutely
wouldn't.
not, right.
No, they wouldn't.
So today I would,
Create
yeah.
a separation of some sort.
And I could tell that Chris had shut her Bible, so we're out of time. But let me just tell you, so today we went to the museum thing. I went with 4 other pastors, right? DeKalb, Sycamore, Marangos, 3 other pastors, right? Then we brought some of our team. We have a BCMA here in Belvedere, Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, us, and 2 independents, right? About 7, 3 independents, about 7. Well, 1 open Bible, right? So about 7 of us, right? They don't agree with my theology, right? The other pastors don't pastor like I pastor. William Mills is much nicer than me, just so you know. He's just nice. He's just really nice. I'm not. I always tell people, in fact, the job description of a pastor never says nice, right? You got to be good. You got to be holy, right? You got to be a lot of things, but nice is not one of them, right? Because sometimes you're going to have to do some things that are not nice to get the Lord's will done, right? That's right. I can tell you, Brandon Arneson, he was a missionary, and he brings a passion, and just the way he deals with things. He and I have a lot alike because we both were like, American church, what's wrong with you, right? Which Curtis came back from Honduras with. He's like, American church, what's wrong with them, right? Because you get that sense when you're in churches in other places, in other countries, you're like, wait, you mean our church, the American church isn't the only, right? But the thing about it is the pastors that I connect with are because we all know, right? Like I'm not going to go to the Lutheran pastor. I'm not going to go to members of their church because sometimes they'll come through our pantry. Sometimes members of the other church, I'll run into them in town. And we never badmouth each other. You know why? Because no matter, and even when people say, well, I go to such and such church, but my pastor there, blah, 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 I'm like, hey, you know what? Your pastor's a good guy. I will take up for them, right? Because I know their hearts, right? They do it different me. They're not me. But I don't have to make myself a better pastor by putting another pastor down. There are pastors in this town, there are pastors in this area that I don't fellowship with for that reason. I mean, I will put myself out there and I will take them to coffee as much as I can, but I also understand in my heart of hearts that when they're in front of their people, listen to their sermon, and what they say is, they have to use another church as the bad guy, right? Well, those guys and blah, 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 but we're the real church and we really do it like that, right? And I love to pick on Baptists because I went to an independent fundamentalist Baptist school, and it doesn't matter if you pick on Baptists or not, they're not going to listen to you. Say what you want. I'm kidding. I love them. But at the same point, I don't have to make them a bad guy in order to make me a good guy, right? Them being a bad pastor doesn't make me a good pastor, right? Putting them down doesn't lift me up. Because a good leader understands that God has called certain people. Sometimes people say, I don't feel like I should be at this church anymore. And I'm like, you're right. Like, I have agreed with that. Other people say I'm leaving, and I'm like, you're making a huge mistake. And they're like, I'm totally not. And then when they're back in 6 months, I'm like, how'd it go? Right? Like, that's been more than there's been a dozen times now, right? Well, you got to let people do what they feel the Lord is calling them to do. Like Kristen said, sometimes people say things, and you're like, I don't think it'll work. Go for it. Right? I love it when somebody comes up to me and says, Pastor, I really want to do this thing, right? Especially when it doesn't involve my energy, right? Like if they want, I'm like, listen, if you want room and resource, I would love to, right? One of the problems, again, I know I'm going on and on. One of the problems, again, you run into, and this is across the board, is you have all these people outside of church that just know that your church would be better if you did what they said, right? My favorite is, you know what's wrong with churches? And I'm like, no, and neither do you, right? Like there's so much, like we both, everybody knows what's wrong. There's stuff wrong with every church, right? But you know what? There's stuff wrong with me and there's stuff wrong with Kristen, and we figured out how to love each other for 28 years, right? I know. I can't get her to love Westerns and cowboy hats, and she can't get me to love Christmas music or Christmas movies in July, right? She's like, you want to watch a Christmas movie? I'm like, she said the other day, you want to watch a Christmas movie? I'm like, not with any bone in my body. No. I mean, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, but again, you know what? I love her more than I love any of y'all in this room, right? I'd push y'all into traffic to save her. I mean, I love you, but she's Kristen, right? So anyway, leaders know how to. That tearing other people down is not going to lift them. And a good leader is not insecure. Both a leader and an administrator require confidence in their abilities. And not just confidence and not just Godfidence. You know what Godfidence is, Curtis, right? Faith. Yeah. And it's like we almost have a shorter word for that, I feel like. It's called faith, right? Because faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, right? That the idea that we have faith in God, that even if, and supernatural leadership and supernatural administration start when it goes beyond your natural ability, right?
A good leader wants to build good leadership.
Absolutely.
Within their.
If a leader can't handle other leaders, he's going to have a lot of work. So that's why lazy leaders are the best, because we're like, yeah, raise up some people that'll do this, right?
They want to build you up to be a leader also.
Absolutely. Every now and then somebody will complain about a ministry leader, and I'm like, do you want to do their ministry? Right? Somebody complain about the youth pastor, do you want to do the youth? Right? Complain about kids pastor, you want to run the kids church this week?
Complain about the youth pastor.
Yeah. So let me finish this thought and we're done. The supernatural gifts of leadership and administration only begin at the places where your natural gifts fall off. When you get to that place where you say, I can't lead this church, or this thing is too big for me to administer, right? When there's not enough food and there's not enough money and God feeds everybody anyway, right? You put your hands on it and He blesses it and it happens, right? You get to that place, Lord, I don't know how to lead this church. I don't know how to lead these people. And then everybody in the world shows up on Sunday and you're like, what are they even doing here, Lord? I don't even know why, right? And God's like, you don't worry about it. You're a smaller piece to this puzzle than you think. And I think all the times we tend to think that our gifts and abilities are going to be what saves the day, and it's not. I tell people all the time, I'm going to say this in all humility, I am very gifted and I am very skilled, and I do not trust my gifts and I do not trust my skills, right? Because they have failed me at critical times, right? There have been times where I, charged out into battle, and like Samson, he knew not that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him, right? But it was something I really thought I was supposed to be doing, and then you find out God had no part in that, and God's like, you didn't even ask me. And it's that thing, right? And so what I understand is that even in all those times, there's a faith that says, when I get to the end of what I can do, that there's a supernatural move of God that will lead this church through me, right? Through our administrator, through our other leaders, and that even when we can't make it, He's going to make it work. And it's always going to work out for us, Curtis. You know why? Because it always works out for us, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not as big a part of this puzzle as we think we are. So with that, Josh Moorhead, lead us out. Oh, did you have one more thing?
I was going to say, not about this though, but I was going to let everybody know and everybody online know that Saturday at 4 o'clock, if you want to meet here, guy or girl.
Come over here and say that into the camera.
All right.
Into the camera. Say that.
So we have an awesome carnival coming up August 3rd. And this Saturday at 4, we're all meeting at the church. And we are going to go out and we have, I don't know where they're at, but we have these little pamphlets, whatever, not pamphlets, there we go, these little cards. And we're going to go hand these out door to door. I'm going to put them in plastic sleeves, hang them on their door. People we see out on the sidewalk, we're going to talk to them, invite them personally. If you're scared to talk to people, come out with us anyways, hand them out. And me and Pastor will be out there, grab us and say, hey, go talk to that person, and we will. So the more the merrier. We got 200 to hand out. And so who knows, maybe we'll go out for ice cream afterwards. But anyways.
I actually thought I thought we should stand outside Dairy Ripple and hand these out, right? Like, yeah. Like, I've handed out 5. I deserve an ice cream cone, right? Like, that's, how many do you give out? All right. All right, now Josh, go ahead and pray us out.
Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you for just for this journey that